This is my ode to the hopeless youth, a ballad for the deprived. The crags and glens of the Highlands had swapped their usual crisp and bracken and chilled autumnal breeze for a curiously unseasonable Indian summer, the likes of which Scotland had never seen. Elated as the Scots vacationers were, lying underneath palm trees masquerading as patched up parasols and sheltering inside oyster shells to stay cool, the landscape was sufferingly dry and growing increasingly barren. The animals were unsure of how to act. Mice chased cats in circles and squirrels sought asylum in birds' nests, unable to bury acorns for hibernation. Rumours of wildfire echoed through the valleys between rival farmers, united briefly to perform rounds as lookout to ease their intensifying apprehension. There was a drought. You were no longer allowed to water your lawn. The city folk revolted, aghast and panic-stricken for their dying petunias and empty paddling pools. The air was thick. It pressed upon your chest with unease. Dread culminated that every match spark to light a cigarette may never extinguish. Though the crops were perishing, and nature had actively wilted around him, wee Tammy had not been so upbeat since he was 6, playing with water guns in his cousin's front garden. He was in a pair of beat-up blue swim trunks 2 sizes too large, and was toting a woven brown potato sack slung over one bony shoulder. He was skipping about on the beach, kicking up sand in theatrical arcs, burying crabs in his heavy-footed wake, with a face split wide open with a rarely seen lopsided toothy grin. This never-ending summer wreaked havoc on the wildlife, yet wee Tammy had discovered one patch of soil in the forest still fertile enough for chanterelle mushrooms to grow. Not only was wee Tammy crowned unofficial top chanterelle mushroom distributor of the Greater Lothian area at this barren time, but prices had tripled due to their exotic exclusivity and lack of other fresh produce available on the market. Michelin-star chefs were frothing at the mouth, fighting tooth and nail for these mushrooms, pulling out each other's hair and spiking hors d'oeuvres. The restaurant industry was hitting breaking point due to the dying crops. The thirsty chefs would do anything for a bonus course to add to their tasting menu. Wee Tammy was making more money than if he was selling dope. It was like stealing candy from a baby. He skipped, tail wagging, away from where the vacationers were leisurely stretched out, lobster backs blistering from the relentless sun with their heads buried in the sand. The cloudless sky was reflecting off of the silky water, casting shadows on the rocks as the crests of waves crashed down upon the shore. He turned his back to the water and scampered towards the shady trees, still kicking sand into the air and stepping on a poorly constructed sandcastle to the loud complaining wails of a little girl bursting into tears. She was too busy collecting shiny rocks and shells for a make-believe queen to keep guard of the barracks. The further wee Tammy marched from the cove, the more oppressive the silence became. The Douglas firs trapped the echoing beach laughter in their pinecone arms, and their thick trunks contorted the patches of sun fighting to shine through the clearings. The trees were dying, and the birds were too afraid of the heat to call out and play their usual games. About 15 minutes of trampling north, weaving between trees, wee Tammy hit his favourite clearing, which he had tried to keep hidden from the other mushroom foragers. It wasn't the secluded nature of the area that obstructed the other hunters from picking there. In fact, it was marked on the map in green as a leading prosperous mushroom spot. What prevented the others from foraging in this clearing was respect. Wee Tammy was stood in the outskirts of a natural burial site. The reason the land remained moist enough for chanterelles to prosper even throughout the punishing drought was because of the acute fertility the graves had left the earth. This silent spot of the woods was the only patch in Lothian that wasn't stuck in the all-encompassing swampy Indian summer. It was the only place where the trees were turning auburn and a crisp wind slowly pushed the fallen leaves which blanketed the ground over the graves. It was a perpetual limbo of sombre autumn with a soft mulch carpet to cushion your careful steps. What differentiates a natural burial site from a typical graveyard is the lack of notable gravestones. There are no angels or towering church spires to guide your way. Some graves were humbly adorned with aged flowers, and others had dates stuck on small placards or rocks like flower descriptions in botanical gardens. You had no inclination as to what you were looking at or who rested where. It was imperative to mind your step. The only indication between ground and grave were the raised mounds of dirt piled higher than the neighbouring spots, or in the case of older graves where grass sprouted like macabre tufts of unkept yellowing hair. The older graves blended into the ground more smoothly than the more recent, which protruded several feet from the ground, a lesson which wee Tammy learnt the hard way from tripping over and falling face first into the mud, spitting out the dirt stuck in the gaps of his crooked teeth. The most recent grave reached about 2 feet high. It was barely buried. A bouquet of fresh white flowers tying a neat ribbon with a single thistle lay abreast the mound, and a rock lay at the head inscribed with the date of the day previous, with a painted red heart in a messy childlike script. Chanterelle mushrooms clawed their way out of the raised mounds of dirt like twisted fingers searching for the light, gasping for a fresh start. A ghostly mushroom rebirth, germinating in the greedy stomachs of the socialites dining at Michelin-star restaurants. Wee Tammy's nose was glued to the ground like a truffle pig in pursuit of buried treasure. With his claws retracted, he pants to and from the graves, ripping chanterelles out of the ground to throw into his burlap rubber sack. He did not pause to question the morals of his behaviour. He did not even cast a fleeting glance back at the graves of men who fertilised his dinner. He only cared about the cash he planned to exchange the mushrooms for. Wee Tammy viewed the mushrooms as free for the taking. It was public land with natural fertiliser after all. The dead aren't eating them, so why should they be wasted? Yet, something detained the other foragers from this sullen spot in the woods. They dared not step foot near it other than to rest flowers on the loved and deceased. Wee Tammy was yet to experience death. He was far removed from the concept. To him, these were just mounds of dirt with no bodies underneath, just worm bait. He was young, and the disease of the young mind caused him to be certain he was to live forever. The disease of youth ravishes your morals and your perception of time. It gnaws away at your ear. The young will never die. It is a jealous myth reflected in the eyes of the old. I see the jealousy of the old for the young. This is my ode to the hopeless youth, a ballad for the deprived. A chance to bid farewell to smooth skin, high libido, and half-forgotten dreams. But then, before you have time to face it, time's hourglass shifts. Endless young summer nights become flashes short as a camera's shutter click. 20 becomes 30. 30 becomes 50. 50 becomes 80. And you begin to not feel quite so strong. You sit high up on your castle walls which have yellowed and grown brittle with age, and you wait. You sit and wait because what else is there to do? You wait and you observe. You watch passing kids fall down, scraping their knees in the sand. You see teenage boys recklessly driving down country roads with girls in the passenger seat making the same mistakes you did. You sip another beer, spilling some on your stained shirt, waiting out Indian summers, idly daydreaming of your unhappy regrets. You speculate what life could have been, what once was, and how it was too late to change. But that is a story for the old, and wee Tammy was young. 40 or 50 minutes of foraging later, Tammy the greyhound looked up with a fatigued sigh and a bead of sweat running down his cheek. He had dirt embedded far under his fingernails, and his blue swim trunks were a dusty brown. He loosened the drawstring of his bag, which was filled to the brim with glittering mushrooms, flashing gold in his greedy eyes. He deemed his haul adequate, closed the bag, hoisted it back over his hunched shoulder, and like St. Nicholas bringing gifts to children, he headed to the first restaurant to feed the starving serfs. I wish I could list you the names of the men who fertilised the meals of the Michelin-starred diners, to thank them for their gift, to light a candle for every mushroom we stole. But their names were not on the graves. I wish I could ask them what they thought of the situation. I wish I could ask them if Uitami was wrong for what he had done, but I can't. I got hungry, perhaps I even ate one, or two. They scorched a hole through the pit of my stomach, burning all the way down to my toes. The dead unknowingly fertilised mushrooms, stolen and sautéed in rich buttery garlic by guiltless chefs to feed the insatiable appetites of men and women who can never be filled. Men and women naive as to when are destined to become chanterelle fertiliser to feed the next generation of covetous socialites. Men and women just the same as the last, who will take just one bite and unceremoniously declare that they will forever be young and never feel full.